This talk is a combination of a lot of things that I've learned over the years. Been doing software development for quite a while. My timeline is up here. You can see a lot of different companies, multiple stints in consulting, some full-time work in there too. If I've overlapped with you at any of these companies, it's good to see you again. But currently with CGI, in a director role there, doing lots of AI things since joining, as part of projects, as well as selling to customers, and just helping folks solve problems. I will say as we get started here, this is not an AI talk. It's very much about quality and how to establish quality on the teams you're working on. So I keep that in mind. Not to say that you can't use UAI or use AI for some of the things I'm going to bring up, but not specifically about AI. One of my favorite ones from Twitter, you can see there, small PRs, lots of feedback, large PRs, send it through. And that's where the LGTM looks good to me. One of my prior jobs, that ended up being a lot of the responses on PRs, and it led to a lot of problems. And I'm sure a lot of you have been in this situation as well. You've got a large PR, it gets pushed through because nobody has time, nobody bothers to dig into the details, goes to production, things go south, right? Everything breaks. And so how do we avoid that? How do we avoid that behavior? To start with, we'll talk a little bit about why PR reviews matter and a couple of the different reasons. First and foremost, obviously, reduce risk. It's the exact problem from that prior slide. We're pushing through big changes. We're not taking the time to review, and we're adding risk to the business. So step one, we're trying to reduce risk. It's a collaborative team effort. Let's stop problems before they get into production. Secondly, they're a form of shared context or training for your team. Any junior folks that join teams that I'm on, I tell them this is one of the best ways to learn. Go out, look at PRs, look at the stuff the senior folks are doing, and learn from it. Learn the patterns that they're applying, learn their approaches to algorithms, learn, basically their approach to software writing. Maintainability. Again, often overlooked on systems. How easy is it to read the code, understand what it does, and make changes to it? Again, an undervalued skill. In particular, in this world of AI, this is becoming more and more important. We've got to be able to still understand what the system does, what the code is doing, before we let it move on into production. Improve quality signals. So once software is in production, we need the ability to know what's going on inside of it, observability, monitoring, all of those sorts of things. PR reviews is where we make sure that happens. And lastly, this is collaborative risk management. Just like the first bullet, we're trying to reduce risk. This makes it a team activity. So as we go through the presentation, I'm going to talk about how different roles within the SDLC can contribute to the PR process and how that leads to better quality. So to start with, before we can talk about what are the various steps and how do we get there, what does a high quality PR look like? And I would say, before we go too deep into what are the processes for improving PR reviews, we've got to get past the concept of just looking at them from a style perspective. Oftentimes, especially with large PRs, folks are looking at the style details, not looking at some of the other implementation details. Are we following patterns, et cetera, but not not digging deep enough. So if we're focused on quality, what are the key parts of that? Obviously, correctness. Does it match the requirements? Does it do what it's supposed to? Very basic. Secondly is safety. Does this bleed memory? Does it leak data? Does it explode on contact? Works on my machine, doesn't work in any other environment. What's the blast radius if something goes wrong? If I make a small change here, how far does that go? How much of an impact does it have? Clarity. This goes back to the maintainability topic. How understandable is it? Even if AI wrote the code, can humans understand it? Is it maintainable, et cetera? Testability. Are we developing for the ability to run tests on it? Whether that's unit tests, integration tests, UI tests, et cetera. And then lastly, operability. So again, when we're looking at that PR, how are we making sure that we've put in the right pieces so that we can operate this code? Our feature flags in the right place. How easy is it to roll back if something goes wrong? If there's a large database migration, how do we make sure that as that change is rolled out, we can get back to a working state if we have to? So if we consider all these topics, and these are all the things that are necessary, then how do we meet those goals? How do we figure out how to ensure that we're hitting all those topics and guaranteeing the quality? And based on my past experience, I would posit that there's 3 different viewpoints, and everybody has as a necessary step in every PR, the author, the tester, and the reviewer. Now, when you look at that list, you might be thinking naturally, well, of course the author, and of course the reviewer, those are the developers, they're looking at the code. But I think the one in the middle, the tester's involvement, also is very key. So what we're going to do is we're going to step through and look at how do these different roles contribute, how do they sort of apply their lens to the code in order to deliver quality. So first off, as the statement states there, the reviews or the quality of the review starts before the PR is open. So we have our author character here. How does the author set the team up for success? So we've all been there, right? You've looked at a PR description, you're like, what does this do? And the description says stuff. Or it says push. This is one of my favorites. I've actually seen this on Teams PRs or Team PRs before. Fixed. I fixed it. Or better, I addressed your comments. And then lastly, this is my all-time favorite, the dot. The dot. This is for those teams where there's requirement that in the PR you can't have the blank box. So, dot, moving on. I would prescribe that we should actually work from a template. And here are the things that a good PR description would have. So first off, the what and the why. What did I change? Why did I choose the approach that I did? Next one, scope in and scope out. So like, what data do I expect to come into the methods or the module or the screen? maybe details of the boundaries on that, how long of a string, how big of a number, etc., as well as what do I expect going out? This is the structure of the JSON that this generates, or the structure of the XML. I am that old. I remember XML. How much volume? What's typical? I expect 100 rows or 1,000 rows, or I built this with only 5 rows in mind, etc. How much data did I test with? Including that in the PR or in the PR description. Risk level. How risky is this? This obviously depends on team norms, like what do you expect, what risk are you okay with? What do you feel that, needs to be mitigated, et cetera, et cetera. So an assessment is how risky it is and why you believe it has that risk level. What tests did you perform? Unit tests, integration, I ran these manual tests, et cetera. Good quality PR description has those details so that your team knows what you've already looked at, how you've pushed the code, and what else they might need to look for. Rollout plan. When this goes to production, what's going to have to change? Do we need to flip specific flags, run database migration, change data in production, whatever it happens to be? Similar to the discussion that I mentioned before, if something goes wrong, how do you roll it back? How do I undo the database change? And then lastly, screenshots, logs, metrics. In my mind, these are a little bit optional, but they're definitely helpful. Like, I ran this in the dev environment. Here's the logs I saw came out. Proves 2 things. One, the code's working the way I say it's working, and it also proves I've got the observability in there to know that it's working. Same thing with metrics. If you're running New Relic, Datadog, any of the open telemetry tools, being able to see screenshots of what those metrics look like, volume of the data that you tested with, et cetera. Elapsed time, stack details of the method calls, et cetera. I would imagine the teams you're on right now, you're not getting this level of detail. But if you were a PR reviewer, how much easier would the PR review be if you had all this detail? Think of it in those terms. Think about how much easier you can make it for your teammates if you supplied all of this. Also, thinking from the developer's perspective, the author of the PR, focus on smaller PRs. And anybody who's worked with me on teams, I know I see it's really hard to see with these lights, but I know some of you out here have been on my teams, and this is something I will push on very hard. So, first principle, never mix a feature with a refactor. So if I'm doing a new feature, refactoring should be in a separate PR. If this is a refactoring PR, no new features. Also, one theme per PR. So if I'm making a specific feature change, I shouldn't also be making a performance change. I shouldn't maybe mix 2 features into the same PR. I've seen PRs in the past where I added this new feature and I had to rename this thing, so while I was at it, I changed these other 20 files with the same rename. Make that 2 PRs, okay? And the last one, my hot take, no more than 6 files in a PR. Now, people have pushed back with me on this one, but this is one that I really like, because I think 6 is about the right number for what you can keep in your head while you're doing a review. You can keep track of the logic across those 6 files or so, and if it's larger than that, it starts to get risky. Now, some of you are going to raise your hand and say, no way. If I rename something and I have to touch 50 files to do it, there's no way that I can push that in without breaking the build. Agreed. Completely agreed. These are guidelines. These are not rules. So there are justifiable reasons for breaking the rules. But there should be a goal. This is the guideline. Go for that 6-file limit if you can. As we move from the author, we introduce this other concept of having QA folks look at the PR review. Now, again, age of AI, you can automate some of these things, but I would also posit that your QA team, people on the QA team that are technical enough to understand how the system works, are also knowledgeable enough to look at what you've written to give you feedback. Some of the ways, you can look here, taking acceptance criteria and turning that into executable examples. So these are tests that should be run or should have been run by this point on the code. QA folks are very good at negative tests and boundary cases. Typically, as developers, we see the happy path through the code, and we don't think about all the edge cases and all the other ways that things can go wrong. Ensuring repeatable test steps. Again, QA comes at this, at the code changes with this QA mindset, thinking differently than a developer, and is able to point out, like, these are the test steps that should be being applied. So if you have a separate team that's doing automated testing, like, this is a good feedback, good learning within the team. They should be, pointing out how things have changed, and this is what we need to update in the testing. After release monitoring, if you're using monitoring tools and you're using them correctly, this is an important skill as well. Being able to point out what are the valuable monitors that should be here. So should we be looking at elapsed time around the methods? Should we be looking at throughput? What monitoring should we have in place with regard to this change to know that we haven't broken anything, haven't added a performance problem, etc. Test data. If we're going to be running manual tests, or even if we're running like a automated integration test, understanding what data is going to exercise the change correctly is also a necessary skill, something that maybe developers don't have the same eyes for. And then also environment risks. Hey, we've seen this problem in UAT, something's different between how that environment's provisioned versus how our test environment's provisioned or how production's provisioned. That shouldn't happen, but I'm sure all of you have worked at a place where that is the case. Things don't quite match. And calling out some of those differences and being able to see that from the code perspective, giving that feedback on the PR. Moving on from the QA role, obviously there's the reviewer or reviewers role, and this is where it's important that we, as it says here, we don't drive by. We don't drive by the review. Following slides, sort of how I've learned to approach PR reviewing from the developer perspective, and sort of a hierarchy of steps that I use. So the first part is the 60-second triage. So everybody's busy, everybody doesn't have a ton of time. To that end, even separate from this slide, how many of you schedule time to do PRs? Good. Those of you with hands up, that's good. It's a good early day activity, first thing in the morning. Schedule that 30 minutes, schedule that first hour before anybody else gets in the office or anybody else comes online if you work from home all the time. And set that time aside so that you're not squeezing it between meetings, etc. So the quick 60-second triage. Is it understandable? If I look at the code, if it's that 6 files that I'm looking for, and I can understand what's happening, easy progression from one place to the other, the description is good, and I can understand what's going on, then we keep moving forward. If it's tons of files, the description better be good. It better show me, what's the pathway through, what's changed, why did we change it that way. Second, looking for unit tests. Like, did you put tests? You made changes, you added methods. If they're not covered by tests, it's going to be the first thing in the response. Hey, tests are missing. Quick look at blast radius. Oh, this falls in this critical routine that's part of our pricing process. Or this falls in a very critical step in this batch, which we know has to run in 5 minutes or less, something like that. How big, how destructive can this be? And then lastly, first triage, if there are database changes, configuration changes, or we're introducing new dependencies. So that could be new libraries, dependencies between systems, data shared across boundaries, et cetera. Any of those, that's the first step. Look for all those things that can be very dangerous right out of the gate. After the quick triage, then all the red flags. What are the red flags that are, like this one's gonna require more time, or maybe we need to stop and rethink how this PR is built. Big bang PRs. I did these 3 features, and I did some refactors, and I changed a bunch of database fields. That's more than 6 files. So, unbounded loops, timeout, obviously dangerous. Those are usually pretty easy to spot. Swallowed exceptions, again, pretty easy to spot. I got a catch block, I got nothing in it, or I got a catch block that says logs like, everything's fine here, expected exception. Or exceptions as flow control. Ooh, those are, yikes. Hidden side effects. These are usually pretty easy to spot. You've got a method that returns a Boolean that's in an if block call, or a while block call, or something like that. Depending on the nature, I'm gonna dig directly into that thing and look for what's going on. And if that thing is like writing to the database as part of returning the Boolean, that's risky. It's risky, and might look for refactoring. Lack of observability. So you're missing logs. If you're using a telemetry system, like you're not sending telemetry information on a new, maybe a new module or a new class, it's a concern. Flaky tests. Tests that are going to break under specific scenarios. So like I've got unit tests that are designed to test some sort of date math, and I'm not explicitly driving the date that's the input. I'm just working off today, like is today Saturday, or is today a holiday, et cetera. Easy way to create flaky tests. There are many others as well, but this is the second step. Dig in, look for the red flags.
What do you do if you get those big bang PRs? Do you reject them, or what?
For me, it's a conversation. Like I would go and talk to the person. I probably wouldn't put comments in there. I'd schedule time to talk to them, or if it's in the office, go and talk to them and say like, what can we do about this? Like, can we separate this by layers maybe? Maybe the UI separate from the back end? Depends how big it is.
Thanks.
So after we've done the 60-second overview and the red flags, then we're down to reviewing in layers. And this is, again, this is how I think about it. So kind of tying back to that, like correctness, the intent, and the requirements. So do they match? What was expected in the requirements, and was the code that written match the requirements? Next, I look at design and interfaces. So when adding new APIs, new data models, boundaries between data or boundaries between the system, do they all make sense? Are they following existing patterns? Are they reusing the libraries, the code that's already written within the application? Readability and maintainability. So how easy is it to understand what's happening here? Do variables name themselves? One of the projects I was on, one of the developers I worked with was like, hey, when the compiler runs, it's going to substitute for all these names anyway. So when you're abbreviating down to like 10 characters, that's a waste. You might as well just spell it all out, you know, like camel case or snake case, write out what that thing means, even if it's 50, 60 characters. These days, the IDE will help you with completion, and it's not going to end up like that in the compiled code anyway, so we might as well make it easy to read. Other things in this same bucket, magic strings, magic numbers, those should always have names. I shouldn't have something that's where it's comparing such and such is equal to 5. Like 5 should have a name. Variable name equals 5. Edge cases or risky paths, dig into those deeper. Are there any gotchas? If the data coming in was 10 times as large, would this still work? You know, what if I hit this method with multiple threads? Would it still work? You know, is it going to be called in a threaded case, etc.? Again, tests, crawling through the unit tests, looking at those in detail, making sure that the comments from the QA team were also covered in those tests, if that's something we can do via unit test, not necessarily you know, in a separate UI or a separate integration test. And then last, obviously, all the way down towards the bottom is style. So if there's feedback, again, we're not trying to get personal. We're not trying to, you know, say that people don't know what they're doing or that they don't agree with them because they didn't structure their code the same way you would. But just, you know, if you have feedback, hey, there might be a better way to do this, that's the last thing to add. So once we've thought through and done all the review, then there's the actual leaving of comments. And comments are, again, just as much reviewing as a skill. I think commenting is also a skill. So this is something I've started lately. Comment labeling. So trying to convey additional intent as part of the comments that I give on a PR. I don't write nearly as much code as I used to, but I still do PR reviews from time to time. So things like this, and again, you can come up with your own team norms of what kind of labels you'd like to use. But things like blocking, you know, this is a correctness problem or a security problem or a data loss problem. Must be fixed. A concern, maybe something the way it was built is increasing risk or isn't as maintainable as it could be. So we're going to raise that as a concern. So maybe it's not absolutely correct. You know, it doesn't absolutely have to be fixed, but a follow-on PR should address it pretty quickly. Suggestion, again, you can think of these, you know, sort of decreasing risk of priority or decreasing priority. Suggestions, so maybe there's a better way to, you know, implement this algorithm or an alternative approach. And then lastly, knit or style or whatever term you want to use, but, you know, style, preference, maybe an optional change, something to look at in the future. But again, the goal here is in the comments, we're trying to convey intent just as much as we're trying to convey feedback. This also, I think, is important, especially the wording we use. I noticed, starting, I guess, with myself, coming from the viewpoint, never with the term you, of like, you wrote, da, 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 da. I noticed that such and such is true. This could cause like qualifying things. You know, when we go through and do a code review, there might be things we miss. Being definitive of like this will cause, again, just conveys a different tone, and you can never quite be sure how people are going to read your comments the same way that you were thinking when you wrote them. So again, just being a good teammate, how do you write that in a way that's that's well structured? Can we, again, using the we as team collective responsibility for the changes, not like you need to, etc. And then here's an example. So if you have a stylistic change or something that's maybe not super critical to be fixed, you can present those as examples. Like, here's another way to think about it. Takeaways here: always go for collective ownership. Quality is a team sport. Your team is responsible for it. Don't assume that you know everything. And then lastly, express concerns or risks in terms of possibilities. Stay away from definitives, but work in possibilities. And then lastly, the tone of what you write. Again, being careful about that. The first one there, assume positive intent, goes both ways, right? We always want to, as the reviewer, we're assuming positive intent from the person who wrote the code. Like, they're not trying to mess up the team. They're not trying to write bad code. They're trying to do their best. So assume positive intent. Don't get mad and, go after them in the comments. Same thing is true when you read someone's comments. Again, quality is a team sport. Like, we're all in this together, and we're trying to be positive about getting the best possible product out there. Number two is hopefully obvious, even though in the next line I say don't use obviously. But critique the code, never the person. So always critique the code. Don't, you stink at your job. No, don't do that. Avoid just obviously anything that makes it seem like, hey, this is simple and you should have caught it. It shouldn't have been me who had to catch this. We don't want any of that. Avoid the hyperbole, so like always, never, etc. Avoid those. And if you're ever not sure, always use a question. Ask it in terms of a question. That's always, folks who receive that feedback will always receive it better. So for example, like, this implementation won't work. Maybe ask it as a question. Why did you choose this implementation? What constraints were you considering, etc. Ask that. You'll still get to the same place. You'll still be able to dig into the details, but you'll be a better teammate. You'll cooperate better and come to a better conclusion. So we've covered all three team members involved in the PR process. The last bit is to look at that team holistically and talk about the mechanisms that actually make this process stick, or like make any PR process stick. So when you start to think about team process, if you want to improve something, as the old adage goes, you got to measure it. So you got to know what your metrics are. So on the left-hand side, some process things. How many of you have SLAs on PRs? Anybody's team do that? Like, from the time you post it, it should be reviewed within a day, 24 hours, something like that? Nobody? Have you all fallen asleep? I can't see. So, SLAs on PRs is a good thing to work towards. If you have large or risky changes, look at group reviews, schedule an hour, set aside the first 10, 15 minutes. Everybody's got the hour blocked. Set aside the first 10, 15 minutes. Everybody go look at the PR, read it in detail, leave comments as you do in that first 15 minutes. And then after the 15 or 20 minutes are up, the person who wrote the PR walks everybody through it, talks about the comments that are there, et cetera, et cetera. You make it a collaborative activity with a blocked set of time so that everybody can dig in and work out the details. This is a great approach. I got to be honest, this is a good approach for like document review too. Doesn't have to be PRs. Set aside the time, use the first 20 minutes for everybody to review it, because when you send it out ahead of time and say, please review this before the meeting, nobody does. So set aside the time and make it part of the meeting process. Code owners. Code owners, a handy tool. So especially on large monorepos, becomes almost a necessity. If you own a specific section of the code that gets stepped on regularly, maybe you own something in the database layer, you own a very tight algorithm that's important, and other teams are making changes, it can cause problems. One of the teams I was on, our solution to this, we had some important database tables, and the way the tables were defined was important for some external interfaces. We actually wrote unit tests around those that would pass as long as they stayed in the same state, but would break if somebody changed, the definition of a table column, or changed, added columns, removed columns, etc. So we'd actually break the build if things changed, but we hadn't had a chance to look at them. Seems a little extreme, but it was very effective at keeping bugs from making to production. And then limit PR size, again, 6 files if you can do it, but then also merging regularly to main. Long-running feature branches where folks are merging in a bunch of things, and then you try and merge that to main, becomes very risky as well, just because there's so much change. Things could have changed underneath, and all of the PR reviews of all the small parts that went into that feature branch does not save you from the larger merge back into main. From the metrics side, so basically to help establish that process, the metrics are there. So PR size, easy one to track, like how many files, how many comments were made. Time to first review, that's an easy one, especially if you want to do review SLAs, like how long was it till somebody looked at it. Rework rate, after comments, like how many times do we have to go back and rework to resolve resolve comment, things that were brought up in comments. It's a good measure for sort of initial quality out of the gate. And then test failures after merge. So you merge, tests blow up once they're merged, et cetera, tracking how often that happens. Again, metrics are there so that you can measure and then drive them in a specific direction. All right, so why do PRs matter? 3 things we've worked our way through. They are collaborative risk management. They allow us to operate as a team and drive for quality. Their goals should be quality beyond style. So we should be looking at all the parameters of quality and making sure that's part of our how we create descriptions, how we review PRs, et cetera. And then advocating for the 3 viewpoints and the team process to make it all stick. So, coming out of this talk, you're thinking, okay, I learned all of this. What can I do tomorrow to make it better? How can I bring this to my team? And I would posit that these three are pretty easy to get started on. So like commenting with your own comment labels, that's an easy one. Your team will thank you for it. Risks and test plan in the PR description, like those aren't very common, especially when developers are writing out their PR description. So consider adding those. Point out what you think is risky. Point out what you think the test plan should be. How should this be manually tested, or what do we need to add to the integration suite, et cetera. And then I'd encourage you to look at the top-down, using some of those comment standards. So making sure that you're being kind to your teammates. And that's everything. Appreciate your time today. Thank you. And if you have questions, happy to bring it, talk to them. All the links there are basically the resources behind this. So if you want to dig into any of the standards that are out there, some of the topics that I brought up come from some of those details.